The challenge that echoed through the stars. The stars above the summit world burned like cold fire as ships from 100 worlds drifted into orbit. On the ground below, the surface of the neutral planet buzzed with voices from every corner of the galaxy. Flags of different species waved beside each other in the wind. Tall towers of silver rose from the center where the Grand Hall stood. It was here that the Galactic Summit was being held, a rare event where leaders gathered to speak of peace. Instead of war inside the Grand Hall, rows of delegates sat together. Some had feathers, others had scales, a few had no faces at all. Yet, all of them turned when the human representative stood. His name was Aaron, his face was calm, his voice was steady. He spoke not as a soldier, but as one who had seen what war could do. He spoke of trade, of unity, of progress built together. Some nodded in agreement. Some looked at him with suspicion. Then the doors of the hall thundered open. A wave of silence moved through the crowd as a tall alien figure walked in. He wore armor made of black metal. His eyes glowed red like fire. His skin was thick and rough like stone. He was known as Carthan the Warlord, leader of a vast empire built by force. He had not come to listen. He had come to challenge. Ekon raised his voice and pointed toward Aaron. He called humans weak. He said peace was for the broken. He claimed that power ruled the stars, and that only the strong deserved a seat at the table. His voice rang across the room like thunder. Then he did something that shocked them all. He issued a combat challenge. He demanded single combat to prove who was worthy. It was an old law still valid under galactic rule. If accepted, the fight would be broadcast live across the systems. Billions would watch. And the result would shape the future of Earth's place in the Council. Some thought the humans would send a warrior, a general maybe, or a champion from their military forces. The crowd turned to the human section. The Earth delegation stood silent. Then Aaron stepped forward again. He said he would accept the challenge himself. The room burst into noise. Delegates from many worlds shouted at once. Some laughed. Some warned him. Some just stared in shock. A diplomat had never accepted a warrior's challenge. It was madness. It was suicide. Aaron did not flinch. He looked straight at Carthan and nodded once. His voice remained calm. He said if words held no value, then he would let his actions speak. He said strength came in many forms, and not all of them required weapons. The council tried to stop it. Rules were double-checked. Protests were filed, but the law was clear. The challenge was legal. And the moment Aaron accepted, it became official. The duel would happen in 5 days on the arena. Moon news spread like fire. Across space stations and colonies. Across barren worlds and floating cities. Across the dark edges of the galaxy where pirates and kings both watched. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when a human diplomat faced an alien warlord in a fight that could shape the stars on the arena. Moon. Preparations began. The battlefield was ancient, wide and empty, carved into stone long before Earth's first cities rose. It was meant for duels of honor. It had seen blood, fire, and legend. Now it would see something different. Aaron trained, but not in the way others expected. He did not lift heavy weapons or wear armor. Instead, he sat with alien scholars. He read about Carthan's history, his culture, his laws, his honor codes. He studied not how to fight, but how to understand. He spent hours listening to ancient chants and studying hand signs used by Carthan's people. Every night he sat under the stars and thought about what message he would carry into the arena. Back on Carthan's ship, the Warlord laughed. He saw no threat. To him it was a game. A message to the galaxy that no matter what humans claimed, they were still weak. He sharpened his blades and prepared for the kill. His soldiers celebrated early victory. His advisors warned him of something strange. They said Aaron's calm was not weakness. They said it might be something more. Carthan ignored them. On the 5th day, the galaxy held its breath. Ships floated around the arena moon. Screens flickered in every direction. Bars, temples, homes, stations. From the cold rings of Vora Prime to the deep caves of the Red Sunbelt, everyone was watching. The arena gates opened. Ned Carthan stepped in first, armor shining, weapons gleaming. He raised his arms and roared. Then came Aaron. No armor, no sword. Just a simple coat and a steady walk. He looked across the field and gave a small nod. The crowd did not cheer. They waited. The duel would begin in moments. And what followed next would echo far beyond the stone walls of the arena. For this was not just a test of strength. It was a battle of belief, and Aaron had come not to fight. He had come to change everything. Warrior versus words. The arena of judgment. The air on the arena moon was dry and heavy, as if it carried the weight of ancient battles. The sky above had no clouds, only stars shining cold and distant. The crowd in the stands was silent for a moment, just before the gong sounded. Then came the roar, a sound that rose like a storm from every corner of the arena. Billions watched through screens across the galaxy, while the two figures stood facing each other in the open field. Carthan stood with his twin blades raised high, his body tense, his eyes full of fire. His armor moved like living metal shaped by years of conquest. Every line across his skin told stories of battle. Every scar was a medal he wore with pride. To him this fight was already won. He did not see an opponent. He saw a message. He saw a chance to break the rising influence of humanity. With one swift strike across from him stood Aaron, wearing no armor, no weapon, no shield. Only a coat and boots built for travel. His hands were empty, but his mind was sharp. His eyes moved calmly, watching Carthan's stance, the shift in his shoulders, the angle of his weapons. Aaron was not trained in physical combat, but he had studied the Warlord's culture with precision. He understood that this duel was not just about strength. It was about meaning. It was about what each warrior represented. The gong echoed again, and the duel began. Carthan rushed forward, his footsteps loud on the stone. His first strike was fast, aimed at Aaron's side. The human diplomat stepped back, his movement slow but clear. He raised a hand not to block but to signal. It was a gesture used in Carthan's culture long ago, meaning peace before first blood. The crowd gasped. The warlord froze for a second, surprised by the gesture. Aaron spoke clearly, using Carthan's native language. He asked if Carthan would honor the old ways, if he would fight not just with blades but with tradition. Carthan growled but gave a nod. He could not deny a gesture from his own history. That was the rule. That was the law. Aaron continued speaking as he moved slowly around the arena, his words steady. He reminded the warlord of the ancient warrior code, which stated that a challenge of worth could include not only battle but also trials of wisdom. The code had not been used in centuries, but it was real, written in old scrolls, buried in archives. Aaron had found them. He had learned every line. He now used those forgotten rules to shift the shape of the duel. Carthan hesitated for the first time. He had never expected his opponent to use the warrior code against him. But now the galaxy was watching, and if he broke the code he would lose his honor. That was worse than losing a battle. So he agreed to let the duel continue under the terms of mixed trial. Combat and challenge of ideals. The rules allowed it. The law permitted it. And the galaxy leaned forward to see what would happen next. Aaron began the next phase. He spoke of Earth not as a world of conquest, but as a place that had seen fire and ruin and chosen to grow. He told stories of peace built after centuries of war. He described the strength it took not to fight back, but to walk away. He spoke of unity across borders, and of people who stood up not with guns, but with courage and compassion. Carthan responded with tales of glory, of battles that shaped his empire, of victories that brought order to chaos, of enemies crushed under his rule. His voice thundered across the arena and shook the stone. But there was something in the crowd. Now something new. A silence not of fear but of thought. The audience had heard battle cries before. Now they were hearing something else. Aaron moved closer. He spoke directly to Carthan, reminding him that his own rise to power had not begun with violence, but with survival. He told of Carthan's early life in exile, when he had won leadership not by strength alone, but by convincing clans to unite. Aaron praised that moment, saying it was the Warlord's greatest act of strength, not a kill, but a choice. Carthan stood still for the first time, his hands lowered a little. The blades tilted downward. His face did not twist in anger, but in something older. A memory, perhaps. A flicker of something lost. Aaron took the moment and pressed further. He asked if strength was only the power to destroy, or if it could also be the power to protect. He spoke not like a fighter, but like a mirror, showing Carthan a reflection of who he once was. The arena remained quiet. The rules of the duel had changed. The challenge had become something different. The crowd felt it. The galaxy felt it. A warrior and a diplomat were now locked in a battle of ideas that cut deeper than any. Carthan tried to strike again, but his attack lacked the same fire. Aaron dodged using simple movements, nothing flashy, only what was needed. He countered not with fists, but with words. Each time Carthan attacked, Aaron responded with meaning, with memories, with truths that could not be ignored by the end of the hour. Carthan stood breathing hard, his armor marked from the dust, his pride shaken. Aaron stood across from him, still calm, his coat dirtied, his voice steady. He had not landed a single blow yet. Somehow he had turned the duel into something no one had expected. The judges began to whisper. The council watched from high towers. Across the galaxy, people began asking the same question. Was this a victory of the mind? Could a diplomat truly stand against a warlord and remain unbroken? Could wisdom become the new power in a galaxy shaped by war? As the sun above the arena moon began to set, the duel remained unfinished, yet the balance had already started to shift. Something deep inside the hearts of the watchers had begun to change. The warlord's fury had met the calm force of reason, and the result was not yet decided. But one thing was clear: the galaxy would never see strength the same way again. Turning point. The wind across the arena moon whispered over the stone floor, carrying the dust of many old battles. Two figures stood still in the center, one in armor that had seen 100 wars, the other in plain clothes, worn by time and purpose. The silence between them was heavy, not with fear, but with thought. The kind of silence that came before something changed forever. Aaron looked into the eyes of Carthan, not as an enemy, but as someone trying to reach past the armor, past the roar, and into the mind of a ruler who had long forgotten where he began. The crowd watched in quiet, waves of breath held, and hearts unsure. This was not how battles were meant to go. They had come for blood, but now they stayed for something else, something harder to numb. Carthan raised his blades again, his arms still strong, but his movements no longer held the same fire. His strikes had meaning once, but now that meaning felt blurred. He moved forward, and Aaron stepped aside, not with panic but with grace. Every motion from the diplomat was simple yet clear, as if each step was part of a deeper rhythm. Only he understood. Aaron spoke again, not loud, not proud, but with the weight of truth. He reminded Carthan of the first time he stood before his own people, not with weapons, but with words. He had united scattered clans not through force, but with vision. He had shown them survival, not conquest. He had built something greater than victory. Aaron asked why that story was buried beneath the shadows of war. Carthan did not answer right away. His breath was heavy, his eyes narrow. Somewhere inside him a fire flickered, confused between rage and reason. He swung once more, and Aaron dropped low, not to strike back, but to let the Warlord pass. Again no weapon was drawn, again no blood was spilled from the edge of the arena. Members of the Galactic Council whispered among themselves. These were leaders of worlds, watchers of law, judges of fate. They had never seen such a duel. They checked rules again, old scrolls, laws, etched in stone files older than time. Aaron was not breaking any code. He was following a path buried deep within their own history. Aaron spoke again, this time to the galaxy, not just to the Warlord. He spoke of how every empire began the same, not with glory, but with struggle. He spoke of how true strength was not found in domination, but in the ability to rise without stepping on others. He called upon the crowd to see not the fight, but what the fight revealed. Somewhere across the arena, a group of Carthan's own advisors exchanged glances. Their leader had not fallen, but he had stumbled. His blade was still sharp, but his cause had lost its edge. They had seen him win many duels, but none had ever made him question his path. Until now. Aaron stood straight, his hands still at his sides. He asked one final question. If this duel ended not with death, but with choice, would Carthan still hold power? Would he still be respected or feared, or something more? Carthan's fists clenched. His armor cracked at the shoulder, a mark from his own missed blow. He looked at Aaron, this small human, with no sword, no shield, no army. A man who had stood against him with nothing but voice and truth. Carthan thought of the crowd, of the billions, watching, of the leaders recording every moment of his own. People waiting for what he would do next. He spoke now, his voice low but clear. He asked Aaron why he accepted the challenge, knowing he could die. Aaron replied, not for glory, not for victory, but because someone had to show that peace was not weakness, and that words could stand where weapons once ruled. That answer echoed beyond the walls, beyond the moon, and into the hearts of all who listened. The crowd did not cheer, but they felt something shift. Something old and cold began to melt. A warlord had been slowed by a man of thought. A galaxy shaped by violence now stood before a new doer. Carthan dropped his blades to the ground. The metal rang across the stone like thunder chased away by light. He looked to the sky, not in defeat but in reflection. The council stood, the judges wrote, the laws had been met. The duel had turned. Aaron walked forward slowly and stood beside Carthan, not as a winner, but as a messenger. The two stood, shoulder to shoulder, silent again, but no longer locked in battle. They looked toward the stands, toward the stars, toward a future that had started to bend in a new direction. Back on distant world screens flickered with the image of the two figures in the arena. Children asked questions. Elders sat in thought. Soldiers watched with quiet eyes. Diplomats smiled with hope. Change had not come with war. It had come with courage, and as the arena moon turned beneath the stars, a message traveled faster than light, carried on signals and breath and dreams. Maybe strength had a new name. Maybe it wore no armor. Maybe it carried no sword. Collapse of an empire. The arena floor remained quiet long after the blades had touched the stone, long after the voices had faded into stillness. Carthan stood at the center, no longer in a stance of battle, but in a shape unfamiliar to the galaxy, one of stillness and thought. The warlord who once ruled by fire now faced a silence that felt heavier than any sword. Aaron stood beside him, not with triumph, but with calm understanding. His eyes watched the sky while his mind listened to the shift in the air. Something was breaking, not just in the arena but across space. From distant moons to crowded stations, From merchant ships to deep colonies, people were feeling the same thing. The balance had moved. Carthan's advisors gathered in quiet corners, their faces uncertain, their eyes searching the laws for a way to reverse what had begun. But there was no clause, no loophole, no command that could undo the truth witnessed by billions. The warrior had been faced not with another warrior, but with something more dangerous than steel. An idea. And that idea had stood its ground on Carthan's homeworld. Riots began not with weapons, but with questions. In the great city of stone, Wall's youth marched through the streets, carrying images of the duel. They shouted not for conquest, but for change. Soldiers stood on rooftops, unsure whether to stop them or to listen. The old chants of the Empire were drowned under the voices of those who had seen what a single human had done without lifting a hand in violence. The Empire began to fracture. Border colonies, once silent, now spoke out. Leaders of smaller worlds sent messages to the Council requesting reforms, asking why their voices had been silenced by force for so long. Carthan's allies started to pull back, choosing distance over loyalty, unsure if their support would become their downfall. Aaron watched from orbit as the shift spread. He met with council members who once doubted him. Now they sat across the table, not as critics, but as listeners. He spoke of structure, of shared vision, of balance built on respect, not fear. They nodded not because they were forced to, but because they had seen proof. Carthan remained in isolation, his ship drifting far from the arena moon. No message came from him. His commanders argued among themselves. Some wanted to restore the old ways through battle. Others warned that the people would not follow. Not after what they had seen. Not after the duel that was not a duel. A moment that had changed the very meaning of strength. In secret rooms, rebel voices grew louder. Some spoke of ending the Empire. Others spoke of transforming it. The sound of reform echoed louder than any war chant had in decades. New leaders rose not from noble houses, but from the ground, from farms and schools, from science labs and old mines. These voices pointed not at stars to conquer, but at people to unite. Aaron became a symbol not of Earth alone, but of possibility. He was invited to speak at gatherings where enemies once stood apart. His words were translated into hundreds of languages. His image painted on walls of places he had never visited. He had not raised a hand in battle, but his influence cut through borders. Like light through darkness, the Galactic Council began to rewrite its laws. The combat clause was reviewed, debated, and changed. From now on, physical challenge could be countered by challenge of reason. A new balance had entered the council chamber. The age of strength through force had begun to shift toward an age of strength through understanding. Karth's name no longer brought the fear it once did. In some places it brought anger. In others, sadness. In some corners even respect remained, but it had changed. No longer was he the invincible warlord. He was now a reminder of power challenged, of pride tested, of an empire that could not silence the truth. On a quiet station near the edge of the HFY known systems, Aaron sat with an old friend, a council historian, who once told him that diplomacy was a slow weapon. The historian now admitted he was wrong. Not because he had doubted Aaron, but because he had never imagined diplomacy could move like a fire across stars. Aaron said little. He believed in the ripple more than the wave, in the small moment more than the grand speech. What mattered now was what others did next. He had stood in the center once. Now it was time for others to rise. Carthan's disappearance became a mystery. Some claimed he returned to his home planet to live in silence. Others believed he wandered the stars seeking answers he had never needed before. A few said he died alone in battle with himself. But no record was found, no proof. Only silence and the echo of his last duel. The empire he had built did not collapse in fire. It folded like paper under the weight of its own shadow. Not destroyed, but changed. Not shattered but opened. And in that space where fear had once ruled, something new began to grow back on Earth. Children learned the story in schools. Not as a tale of war, but as a lesson in choice. Statues were built not of Aaron alone, but of the moment when strength was redefined. Leaders from new worlds came to visit not because they had to, but because they wanted to understand the place that had sent a diplomat instead of a warrior in. The quiet hours of the galactic night, when screens turned off and ships drifted through the dark, there was a feeling shared by many. That peace was no longer just a dream. It had become a decision. A path proven not by the end of battle, but by the choice to never begin one. The duel that changed the galaxy. The stars moved slowly across the skies above the capital world, where the council now stood taller than ever before, not because of walls or weapons, but because of what they had learned from a man who had walked into battle without lifting a single weapon. His name echoed through chambers and homes across planets, where peace had once seemed like a distant myth. Aaron walked through the council gardens where stone paths met glowing trees and water ran without end through crystal streams. His steps quiet, his face calm, his thoughts steady. He had done what many thought was impossible, not by strength of arm, but by strength of purpose. He had looked into the eyes of a warlord and seen not just a fighter, but a soul struggling to remember who he once was. The garden was quiet, but not empty. Young leaders from distant worlds sat beneath the trees, learning history, not from old dusty books, but from the living breath of those who had witnessed the change. They no longer trained only in battle tactics, but also in languages, customs, shared knowledge. They no longer sought to rule. They sought to understand. Carthan's empire had changed. What once stood as a wall now became a bridge. The capital city of the former war empire had transformed into a place where old generals now served as advisors for peace missions. Their maps no longer marked targets, they marked trade routes. Schools replaced barracks. Symbols of war were taken down and replaced with flags bearing new signs of unity. Nobody forgot what Carthan had done. Nobody erased the past. But they chose to shape the future with different hands. His name became a lesson not of failure but of transition. From fear to thought. From conquest to connection. The galaxy began to write new stories, and for the first time they began with words instead of weapons. Aaron sat with council members both old and new. They spoke not of power but of progress. Not of enemies but of neighbors. They worked through disagreements with long talks and careful listening. He watched as delegates who once stood on opposite sides of bitter wars now shared meals, shared ideas, even shared laughter. Across the stars, news came in waves. A planet long thought lost to war had begun healing. A mining colony once ruled by fear had opened schools for alien children. A ship built for invasion had been remade into a floating hospital. One by one, lights turned on in places that had long lived in shadow. Aaron returned to Earth briefly, not for celebration, but to walk the streets he once called home. People waved but gave him space. He did not enjoy fame. He enjoyed quiet. He met students who studied diplomacy not as a weak field, but as the sharpest edge of civilization. They asked him questions. He answered with care. They looked at him, not as a hero but as a guide. In the center of the Galactic Museum, a sculpture was placed where all could see. It did not show a sword. It did not show a flag. It showed two figures standing in silence, one with blades lowered, the other with hands open. There was no title, no plaque, only a small engraving carved into the base. It read, "The moment everything changed." Ships now traveled without fear across sectors that were once locked by borders. Cultures mixed not through conquest, but through shared dreams. A song born on a forest world became popular in a desert colony. A recipe made by ice miners was shared in spaceports, full of color and laughter. Small things began to matter more. That was the real change. Carthan was never seen again, but sometimes rumors came from quiet parts of the galaxy. That he lived as a wanderer. That he visited border towns teaching honor without blood. That he once stopped a local war by walking into the center and saying nothing at all. Nobody could confirm the truth, but some swore they saw him once with a coat like Aaron's walking away from a broken battlefield with a child on his shoulder. Aaron aged as all beings do. His hair silvered, his voice softened. He refused higher positions instead, choosing to stay where he was most needed in conversations that could turn to conflict if not guided with care. When he finally stepped down from council service, the chamber held a long moment of silence. Not as a goodbye, but as a thank you. He passed his knowledge to others, not as rules, but as questions. What is strength? What is victory? What is peace? He believed the answers would never be the same for everyone, and that was the point. His legacy was not a story to copy, but a path to walk with your own steps. At the edge of known space, a station was built for learning only. No weapons were allowed. Only voices. It was named Horizon 1, a place where young minds of every species could come not to win debates, but to share truths. The walls of the station were covered with messages sent from across the stars, each one beginning with the same words, "We remember the dual land." So the galaxy moved forward not in silence, not in chaos, but in the rhythm of learning, growing, healing. All because one man chose to answer a challenge, not with violence, but with vision. A challenge that began in a circle of stone and ended with the stars looking just a little closer together. Strength had found a new meaning, and it spoke in every language. Now the duel had ended, but the story would never fade. The end.